to thank you for coming. I always start by quoting Woody Allen, who says that 9/10 of life is about showing up. And in these particular circumstances, getting to the new central library, easily reached by tram or bus, according to this postcard that I acquired this morning, might be slightly inaccurate, but maybe it's a reflection of the energy that's going on here in Manchester. So it gives me particular pleasure to welcome you here to this building, since I am a Mancunian. As a sixth former, we used to be regular visitors to the excellent library theatre based here. It has a glorious heritage. Tony Hopkins and Patrick Stewart began their distinguished careers here, and it's good to see the new theatre created in a part of the city named after another local boy, Tony Wilson, the founder of Factory Records. Enthusiasts might argue this is a promising manifestation of the Northern Powerhouse. This leads us on to our theme today, where next for the Northern Powerhouse? This is a highly topical issue. The phrase is hardly out of the headlines, and today we learn that Lord Adonis is going to become the chairman of the new National Infrastructure Commission. But in reality, how much substance is there behind the rhetoric? Is the term merely a gimmick? The term Northern Powerhouse was coined by George Osborne in a speech he made in this very city around 18 months ago. The Chancellor's vision is to forge a partnership between our great northern conurbations so that they can compete not just with our capital, but as he puts it, take on the world. In this context, I think it's worth pointing out that one of the Chancellor's special advisors, Neil O'Brien, who was a client of mine, harks from Huddersfield, while the Chancellor, of course, represents a Cheshire seat. The motivation behind this initiative, as I understand it, is to help redress what is perceived as a damaging north-south economic imbalance and to attract investment into northern cities and towns. In this respect, the North can point to strengths in manufacturing, science and technology, and the services sector. I guess soccer comes into that as leisure services. Greater Manchester is leading the way in terms of having greater control over its budget. From 2017, it will be run by an elected mayor, and the city will have full control of its health and social care budget and services from 2016-17. This is substantial money, since the current budget amounts to around £6 billion. But one of the characteristics of the North is the rivalry between cities such as Liverpool and Manchester, and even more so the historic wariness between the Red Rose County and Yorkshire. How these potential tensions are best addressed is one of the key challenges sitting in the Minister's in trade. So we are fortunate to have Mr. Wharton here today to explain how he sees the future path for the Northern Powerhouse. Jim O'Neill, another Manchester boy who found fame at Goldman Sachs, was the chairman of the City Growth Commission. In this role, he suggested last year that an effort should be made to merge the economies of Liverpool and Manchester, since neither, in his opinion, was strong enough to succeed alone. Now that he is a government minister in the Lords, Jim O'Neill has an opportunity to implement this vision. I note that in his winding up speech on the budget statement held on the 21st of July, he observed, and I quote, that having transport for the North and a northern oyster is exceptionally important. He added, for the Northern Powerhouse to be anything other than a number of cities geographically identified with a pin, it is important that the cities are joined together on an economic basis, if not an administrative one, in a way that has not been pursued before. To help us explore precisely how this might be achieved, we have three distinguished speakers on our panel to give us their take on where this initiative is heading. Paul Cheshire is an academic I have admired for many decades, having first heard him give a talk on planning dislocations at the Institute of Economic Affairs. His recent book, this is where I'm going to plug it, Urban Economics and Urban Policy, Challenging Conventional Wisdom, shortly to be out in paperback at an affordable or more affordable £25. Paul's co-authored with his LSE colleagues Henry Overman and Max Nathan what I consider to be one of the best works I have ever read on the issue of planning and cities, characterised by that inspired American writer Jane Jacobs as organised complexity. I recommend you, and especially the Minister, read it. One of your senior civil servants says she has a copy for you, who I met on Thursday. Dave Swindle works with AERCOM, the group who are sponsoring today's event. AERCOM may not be a familiar name to some of you, but if you look at the company's website, you'll discover that it is a Fortune 500 company, quoted on the New York Stock Exchange, employing over 100,000 people worldwide. And Dave has just told me, am I correct in saying that you employ 25,000?
23,000.
23,000 and rising in the UK. It's won a stack of awards for its design and engineering capability. In the UK, it is working on Crossrail and the Thames Tideway Tunnel, while here in the Northwest, AERCOM's design and planning practice won a prestigious award from REBA for its revitalisation of the Pierhead and Canal Link in Liverpool. Mr. Swindle is an engineer by background and holds both a Master's in Nuclear Engineering and an MBA. Among a clutch of honours, he is the recipient of the Award of Excellence from the US Department of Energy and another from the US Army. Here in the UK, Dave is responsible for new international business development and special projects, which include work with the MOD and at Sellafield in Cumbria. James Wharton was elected MP for Stockton South in May 2010. Stockton was traditionally a Labour seat, although it was represented for a long period between the wars by none other than Harold Macmillan. James read law at Durham University and subsequently qualified as a solicitor, practising in the North East. James was the youngest Conservative MP in Parliament in 2010, and his career has advanced speedily since then. This May, he was appointed Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State in the Department for Communities and Local Government, where he is responsible for the Northern Powerhouse initiative. I will ask Professor Cheshire to start us off, and then ask Dave Swindle to give us his observations on the opportunities and challenges associated with the Northern Powerhouse initiative, and the Minister will then set out his vision before I move on to a Q&A session, which is your chance to quiz our speakers. Finally, I will invite our three speakers to offer some concluding remarks based on what they have heard from the audience. And one final note, could you please turn your mobile phones to silent, otherwise you won't qualify for any more craft beer. So, Paul, can I hand over to you? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Keith, and thank you for inviting me here. So I'm an academic, so my job, as I have construed it over 50 years almost, is to try to say it as I see it, to read and evaluate the evidence, and then follow it, to judge what it tells us. So sometimes, obviously, I'm wrong, but nevertheless, it's not my job to put positive glosses on uncomfortable realities. I leave that to others. And one of the uncomfortable facts is that reviving the North has been on the agenda for longer than probably almost anybody in this room has been alive. Take my job record. Almost my first job was working on a major research project funded by the long since defunct Department of Economic Affairs in Whitehall to do the research on something called the Framework of Regional Economics, because the Wilson government, as it was worried about the decline of the northern regions. The first big academic study I ran myself was funded by the European Commission, and that was in the 1980s, on the problem of declining urban regions, cities across Europe. Now, one element of that study was to try to get quantitative indicators of how prosperous cities were and how badly performing cities were. Purely an attempt to get quantitative indicators, which generated the result that Liverpool on the one hand and Naples on the other were the two worst performing cities in Europe. which got me into terrible trouble in Liverpool, as you may imagine. However, that's what the data said. The first efforts we made were the Barlow Royal Commission, which started up in business in 1940. On a positive note, because there are positive, I don't want to be just a gloomy doom. One of the main recommendations of that study I did nearly 30 years ago for the European Commission was that we needed to think about cities as city regions, not as jurisdictional local authorities or whatever they were. We needed, if we were to understand cities and to help improve them, we needed data collected systematically for those city regions, rather than for administrative units. And the reason for that was because it's city regions which are really operating as labour markets, as housing markets, as local economies. People don't stop looking for jobs at the boundary of Manchester and Salford, or even at the boundary of Yorkshire and Lancashire. They operate as a whole interacting labour market, the Greater Manchester area, and it's much greater than most of us imagine, as does all the other major cities in Europe. So we English, like to think of ourselves as living in Ambridge, but the reality is that actually you're living in ex-urban Birmingham, because it's all under the influence of these large city regions. So when we build houses, we should be building them in terms of the needs and demands and the economy of the whole city region, not in terms of local authorities, which is balkanizing the decision-making process. When we think about skills and job availability and where we're going to create jobs, it's not a question of is it in this side of the barrier of the local authority boundary or the other. As long as it's in the same city region, those new jobs will benefit everybody more or less equally, because these commuting patterns mean that everything evens out across the city region very rapidly in terms of job opportunities and wages. So we need policies for the whole city region. Transport systems, for example, to deal with both commuting and to deal with the interactions between business, which we often forget about, need to be planned at the city region level. We need labour market policies that operate at the city region level, make sure that we supply skills, etc. We need strategic planning in terms of ensuring that there's adequate space for housing and adequate space for business premises, and that the prices are affordable at the level of the city region, because that's how property markets work. That's the reality. And we need local economic development policies at the city region level, because, again, if you create jobs in one place in the city region, it benefits everyone who's working in that labour market, more or less equally, depending on their skills. And there's increasingly research evidence supporting this as really part of it, and it contributes to the differential success across Europe in urban economic performance. And I published a paper back in 2009 demonstrating good statistical evidence for this. Recently, last year, the OECD, who I'm very glad to say now have systematic definitions of city regions and provide data for them, they also provided a research paper demonstrating again that having a government for a city region level improves the economic performance of cities. So the Northern Powerhouse concept is part of that is interacting with this recognition that we need consolidated authorities for metropolitan areas. We can't rely on the sort of balkanized system of local government that we have in this country. But the problems of old industrial cities, not just in the north of England, but in the US Rust Belt, for example, in southern Belgium, in the Ruhr area of Germany, have been going on for a very long time. And there are fundamental reasons for this change. first, very simply, I'm oversimplifying, but very simply, the first is the loss of comparative advantage in the traditional manufacturing industries that grew up in the north of England, for example, in the 19th century. The north of England is no longer the workshop of the world, and it has not been the workshop of the world since 1918. That's an uncomfortable reality. So we have to adapt. And the second fundamental force driving this problem is the increasing importance of agglomeration economies, what economists call agglomeration economies, evidence discussed in that book that Keith offered you earlier on. Now, the evidence on agglomeration economies is really quite recent, and I think most urban economists would agree is more or less conclusive. And the trouble is that the advantages of bigger cities as places for undertaking economic activity are particularly important in the most rapidly growing sectors of the economy, in knowledge-intensive trade and services, in media, in business services, in research and development, in the cultural industries, in finance, and in higher education. Never forget, Manchester's a great example. Higher education is a major industry, and it's an export base of many cities across England, including the north of England. So what the evidence on agglomeration economies is pointing to is that everything else constant, people are more productive. Once you've abstracted from every other thing, are more productive in bigger cities. And I think the best current estimates are that if you double the size of a city, then, and hold everything else the same, people are about 5% more productive. So this is one of the powerful drivers of London's prosperity, of why London has been sucking in activity from across, not just the United Kingdom, but from across Europe, to be honest. London has outperformed Paris in the last 20 years. This is something we should celebrate as people from Britain, because it's part of the relative prosperity of Britain. You can't hammer London in order to push up the northern powerhouse cities. You have to live with London's success and reinforce the success of those northern cities that have got opportunities. So the north needs a powerhouse. I'm very happy with that. And, it's a repackaging of an old idea, but it's a good repackaging, I think. But it doesn't need too many powerhouses. And that is the real problem for politicians, because politicians are always pressed, they're always tempted to spread the jam too thin. They represent places, and every place wants a spoonful of jam. That is one of the reasons why regional policy has failed for 60 years. So, the north, yes, but powerhouse cities must have strong, innovative service sectors. They should have good skills. They should have a good world-class university at their core, if they are to succeed. And when you're talking about cities that fall into that definition, cities like Manchester, or Leeds, or Newcastle, please don't forget Birmingham. We're talking about the northern powerhouse, but we really shouldn't forget our second city, which has potential, huge potential that is unrealised. So the other thing is that the evidence on agglomeration economies is that they are reinforced not by intercity communication, but by better internal communication within cities, better transport, better communication inside the city region, so that economic actors and consumers and workers can interact with each other in productive ways at lower cost and more quickly. And we've done some work at LSE suggesting that the gains to cities like Manchester from improving their internal transport greatly exceed the potential gains from linking Manchester with Leeds or with York or with Liverpool. So, and that's true of the other big cities of the north. It's their internal transport systems that need the money. So in terms of connectivity to other places, international airports are important, but it's doubtful that the north can support more than one serious international airport. But at present, projects like HS2 or the Trans-Pennine Railway are not only dominating the discussion, but they're sucking in the money. And northern powerhouses to work need new funding, not just rebranded funding. And they need funding in particular for that internal transport infrastructure. Because remember, those of you who are from the north, that railway lines run in two directions, as do roads. HS2 may help northern cities, but it may, and the evidence of past experience suggests it's more likely, to help London. There was a very, very rigorous, far-sighted German economist in the 19th century, 1885, who argued that the best defense of a backward region is a bad road. Anyway, so if the northern powerhouse is not to repeat the mistakes of the past, be more than a political slogan, then it needs funds, it needs new funds, and it needs focus. And it needs a degree of ruthlessness to focus on places with good chances. Concentrate on the real potential powerhouse city regions, because not everywhere can be a powerhouse.
Thank you, Paul. I agree with a lot of that, apart from the factual error that, of course, Manchester is the UK's second city, not Birmingham. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Dave.
Very good. Well, first of all, good afternoon, and I'd like to say what it is a privilege for me as an American who has worked in the UK for many years now, supporting the energy and defense sectors, to be able to participate in this Conservative Party event. And in addition, I'd like to thank the Center for Policy Studies for hosting such an important debate this year, and especially the Minister's attendance. Minister, your engagement today is a reflection of how important it is to understand, to discuss both the opportunities, challenges, as well as the needs to achieve the objectives for the Northern Powerhouse. And as my colleague to my right has stated, a strategic, coordinated, and visionary approach, that gives that focus is really clear. And I think what I've seen here from both the outside in is that we truly have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to see the North flourish and show the true potential in the world. So the timing is very right to ask ourselves today, where next for the Northern Powerhouse? So beyond rebranding some existing initiatives, some legacies that have been cited before, the answer is we need some concrete proposals, and this is where Cumbria, which I'll speak more in detail about, has real potential and real projects and investment requirements for the long term. So before getting into details this afternoon, let me first introduce and describe my firm. Keith, you had mentioned that this is not a common name here in the UK. But to put it in perspective, in fact, we've come together over the literally last year, from a combination of a number of firms, to now what's been created is the world's largest engineering firm, created specifically in one full capability to design, build, finance, operate, and service the world's infrastructure across the globe. As was cited, we directly employ over 100,000 professionals worldwide. In the UK and Ireland, we directly employ about 7,500 people in 53 locations. But when combined with our joint ventures, our partnerships, we manage over 23,000 personnel here in the UK and Ireland, indicating that AECOM is one of the UK's largest direct and indirect employers. In short, we touch upon every aspect of the UK's infrastructure, and we support the country's strategic national interest in defense, energy, and transportation, allowing Britain to compete effectively in the global race. So what I want to focus my remarks on this afternoon, and why all of you are here, is to talk about the Northern Powerhouse, in particular the hidden treasure of Cumbria region and its huge potential for this objective. We, AECOM, have been largely involved in Cumbria on nuclear decommissioning, as well as the new nuclear sites activities that are going on in nuclear site operations. Over these years, we have seen And in fact, I have personally seen the immense potential this region has. Cumbria is a hidden treasure of the North, as indicated with huge potential. I first got introduced to it as the Lake District for holiday times and so forth. It's also one of the first places I experienced all 4 seasons in an 8-hour day. But in the past, Cumbria has only been mentioned once in the National Transport Strategy and has often been overlooked in the debate that is so often about Manchester and Leeds, as we mentioned earlier. Cumbrian businesses have huge potential for driving the northern economy and putting the power in the northern powerhouse. So let me give you some examples. Over the next 15 years, greater than 50 billion pounds of planned investments are forecasted for Cumbria. That will require an additional 30,000 jobs that will have to be created in multiple skill levels over the next decade alone. Give you some examples. Sellafield. An estimated $10 billion in decommissioning costs will be invested over the next 2 years to fulfill the objectives set out by the government, but also to reduce the risk as the legacy go forward. There's Nugent, well over 15 billion pounds of new investment to meet the new bill for the energy security and supply. And then there's the National Grid, another 3.4 billion. All of these are critical to Britain's energy supply and security and meeting the nation's carbon targets as well. The Northern District, Cumbria area, is also a home for tourism, which contributes $2.4 billion to the economy and supports about 34,000 jobs in the tourism sector alone as part of the Cumbrian deal. And then there's the water supply, an increasingly important resource for all of the UK. In addition, there's planned approximately 12.5 billion pounds of new investment with BAE for the work in defense and in particular on the successor class submarines. And then on the pure commercial side, there's the investment by GlaxoSmithKline in its work on advanced manufacturing and pharmaceuticals. Thus, to me, and I'm confident also for each of you, it is clear that Cumbria supports high-value growth in the North. But there are some other notable considerations in addition to just pure financial investments to make note of. A couple, for example, energy supply and the cost of energy. We know throughout the world, but particularly here in the UK, manufacturing and drawing and attracting industry to different regions is very much dependent upon the cost of delivering and providing energy. And that's a major factor in manufacturers' decision to be able to relocate to areas that cost of energy. And Cumbria's role in the energy supply in the future will be a major factor in securing long-term manufacturing investment in the UK. An interesting one is I've observed, again, as an American here in the UK, particularly over the last few election cycles, economic security and ties between Scotland and England. In many travels to the Lake District, I've actually observed that the Edinburgh airport is closer to Cumbria than it is to Manchester, right? Although the train connections are not as good, right? But again, energy is a major factor here as Cumbria is strategically located between England and Scotland for ensuring energy security and supply for Scotland in the future as well. So now, what can each of us do for the Northern Powerhouse and for Cumbria? Again, first, from an AECOM perspective, we are both currently heavily invested in and will be expanding our part for Cumbria. And we believe a business-led approach is the way forward. We see Cumbria as a strategic investment opportunity with expanding potential. In our case, AECOM, through its nuclear management partners, which I chair, has already delivered over 715 million pounds of efficiency savings for the taxpayer itself. We've invested over 25 million pounds in the local socioeconomic projects. And as a result of the needs we have on the technical skill level, have recruited a record number of apprentices in 2014. And over the 6 years we've been operating the facilities, this has tripled. And finally, we've increased the expenditure in the local supply chain by over 100 million pounds. In addition, we have been creating an intellectual property that is exportable globally, that was also cited earlier as an export capability. And we also backed the Cumbria devolution deal proposed to government alongside other businesses, both small and large, from the region. and we are contributing to and leading to the input and helping develop Cumbria's long-term infrastructure plan. But we should not forget that essentially the main investments in Cumbria are all underwritten by the taxpayer in one form or the other. For example, the new strike price at Nugent, which is critical to be able to make those continued investments and proceed. There's the defense spending at BAE, and the activity I'm closest to, the nuclear waste and decommissioning work itself. Therefore, any work to underpin and de-risk and deliver these projects does have a direct return to each of you as taxpayers, and I as a British taxpayer now as well, but also a direct return to the government. The private sector is where such return on investments can be maximized, that's been proven, and risk best managed. And to be successful, what we have found, it takes a partnership that not only builds trust, but also delivers on its promises and performance. So to sort of wrap up here, there remains a number of challenges which require cross-government support and better link-up between national and local governments. Examples, for example, to reach the objectives for the Northern Powerhouse requires a focus upon the skill sets that are required for growth. But you've got to have the infrastructure there to be able to support those skills or want to retain and stay in the region. If not, there'll be a vacuum. And there are a number of these city deals, some of which were just referenced a moment ago, that are in process, but some are still in their infancy, as in the case of Cumbria. But there are key learnings by coming together that will help in the process. So in conclusion, business and local government are working hard to ensure Cumbria realizes its potential through a more cohesive approach. But local government will need the support in terms of a cross-government approach to infrastructure and skills, champion the region's IP to support its export abroad, consider initiatives such as enterprise zones for Cumbria and further investment in mobile and broadband communications, and then linking up both spatially and organizationally with more development of the city deals like that in the Northeast and deals like Cumbria is working but still in its infancy. For example, Minister, your work on Tees Valley may offer some similar lessons for Cumbria. It is noted that Teesside and Cumbria have similar existing gross value added contributions to the Northern Powerhouse, still at a small value, 4% and 3% respectively. But in the Teesside example, if you look at the transport links from Cumbria to the Northeast, the Department for Transport today is looking at a strategic study for A66 and A69, while Teesside is looking on how to improve the link from these roads to the east. So what's next for the Northern Powerhouse? In our view, it's expanding the powerhouse potential by bringing Cumbria more into the mix, recognizing the contribution Cumbria has to make in energy production, security, water supply, economic contributions, and organizational integration like the Northeast and Teesside. But I would argue that there is a sense of urgency here to act now and act quickly, particularly in infrastructure and skills development because they are such long lead items. I do worry from an operational standpoint at our Sellafield site in the region that if we don't act, that there will be tremendous wage pressures as competition for a finite and insufficient labor market will exist that will drive cost. In addition, having been in the area at key traffic times, you want to avoid the traffic gridlock, so more infrastructure is required. And then there's the impacts on schools, housing, social infrastructure needs, such as hospitals, restaurants, and other businesses. So I would like to extend to the Minister an invite to Cumbria to see the potential for the region and for delivering a true Northern Powerhouse with Cumbria as a key part. So thank you for the attention this afternoon. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Dave, and I think Algie Clough, the entrepreneur who has a house next to the Centre for Policy Studies, will be most encouraged by what you said about Cumbria, as he's trying to get some coal out of the sea on Workington and Whitehaven. Now, handing over to the Minister for your take on what you're trying to achieve.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation to speak at this event. It's good to see such a strong turnout, which I think speaks to the importance that people place on the Northern Powerhouse as a concept. Thank you for the invitation to the Lake District. I would love to come and visit, and perhaps go and visit some of the industry work in Cumbria as well. I know there are lots of exciting things happening there. And actually it speaks to a point that I want to touch on in my comments, to build on what has already been said about what the Northern Powerhouse is, what it can do, what people think it should be. And there are a range of opinions about what aspects of our national policy, what aspects of the way government works can feed into the overall aim, which is to rebalance our economy, which is to grow the economies of the north of England, which is to ensure they can reach the potential that we all know is there, that underlying potential to be a driver for growth, which would not just be good for the north, for the Northern Powerhouse as a geographic area, but would be good for the UK as a whole. But I want to start out actually by addressing the obvious question, the elephant in the room perhaps, the what is the Northern Powerhouse question. Because there are some people who don't like the concept. There are people who are convinced. There are people who don't think it can be done, but you may as well give up. And there are those, particularly down in Westminster, who for a range of reasons, but primarily often political ones, want to see it fail to make a point. And I see this when I go to debates in Parliament. I see this sometimes from the reaction of some of the journalists who haven't quite bought into it. Some are excellent and understand what is happening. Some are sceptical and cynical about what might be done. And there is a desire, almost uniformly, amongst those who are not necessarily supporters, but they want to narrowly define what the Northern Powerhouse is. They want to say it's devolution, or it's transport. Not just transport, it's this investment. And you'll see that narrative occasionally flare up in the commentary that surrounds this issue, where if one thing doesn't happen, or is delayed, or is cancelled, or whatever might change, they say that's it. The Northern Powerhouse is over as a concept. What now for the Northern Powerhouse? It doesn't exist anymore because one thing has happened. And this is a concept that's so much bigger and more important and all pervasive than that, that cannot be true with any given single example. So the Northern Powerhouse is about devolution. It is about transport investment. It is about UKTI delegations and bringing in investment. It is about the skills agenda. It is about enterprise zones and local enterprise partnerships and what they can do to grow our economy. It's about all of these things. Because as a concept, it is broader than those who oppose it wanted to define it to be. So the Northern Powerhouse is something that will run as a thread throughout this Parliament. It has perhaps the most powerful possible sponsor in George Osborne. This is a project he is entirely bought into. This is a project which he effectively originated and wants to drive from the Treasury, that government department, which is perhaps the most all-pervasive of all government departments, that touches on everything that every other department wishes to do. So when ministers come to see me to ask about the Northern Powerhouse, sometimes it's because they've grasped it and they're excited by it and they want to be part of it. Sometimes it's because they've recognised the reality that in difficult financial times, when there isn't much money about, if a project that you want to promote has a Northern Powerhouse angle to it, there is an additional opportunity to get a hearing from the Treasury to put that idea forward. And that might sound like a minor thing, but that is actually crucially important in the way that government runs. The fact that this idea, this concept, this project has buy-in from the very highest level, from somebody who wants to drive it and understands the challenges that are faced by the economies of the North of England, means that it has very much more chance of success than some of those who oppose it might like to lead you to believe. So when you do occasionally read the story that something hasn't happened or something's been delayed, and then the question of what does this mean for the Northern Powerhouse, it may be something that's not great news, but it certainly doesn't mean that the project itself has been derailed, because there is a huge amount that we're going to be doing. There's a huge amount that is going to evolve as we progress through this Parliament. Because I can't sit here now and say, here is a list, definitively, of the things that are going to touch upon this. Because new opportunities will arise as time goes on. New investments will come forward, new things that we should do, things like bringing UKTI in to do Northern Powerhouse trade missions. They weren't on the agenda 6 months ago when this project was being talked about, but it was an opportunity that was recognised and is being delivered on, and there'll be many more such things that will arise. But what specifically can we expect to see next? This is the key question of this fringe meeting. Well, I can give some short and medium term answers. I can't tell you everything that's going to happen, because some of it will evolve, and some of it I'm not in a position to be able to announce today, so I would get in a lot of trouble if I started announcing policies at fringe meetings that perhaps would be given greater prominence at a later date by others. But you can tempt me, but you'd have to give me an awful lot of this crap. Yeah. There is, particularly in the field of devolution, quite a fast-moving environment. The devolution bill has gone through the House of Lords, it comes back to the House of Commons when we come back from conference. We will be taking that bill through and we'll be delivering it probably at the latest by about January to Royal Assent if all goes well. At the same time, we're talking to areas about devolution and what they want for their community, for their economy. And we're taking a different approach to what government has done before. Central government, national government, Westminster has always tried, when it wants to do something, to apply like a stamp, an identikit model, to different places across the country. So you could say, look at what's happening in Greater Manchester. This seems to be working for Greater Manchester. It's a great idea. There's enthusiasm about it. Therefore, everyone has to do the same. But it wouldn't work if we did it like that. We're actually having individual discussions with areas right across the country about the economic geography that works for them, about the package of powers that they can tailor to meet the opportunities that exist. And actually that recognises that the geography will change from place to place. And the powers that they want and need to deliver improvements to their economy will change as well. What is needed in rural North Yorkshire, it may not be the same as what is needed in Greater Manchester. And we should not pretend that government has all the answers from Whitehall, because that's the very idea and approach that we're trying to get away from. So we are having discussions. Over 30 areas have bid for devolution deals, and we're in the process now of going through those, talking to them, of trying to find the conclusions and the solutions that will deliver for those areas the right package. And not every area will get a devolution deal straight away. There will be discussions to be had. The proposals will have to stack up. The governments will have to make sense. They'll have to be able to demonstrate that they have a plan with what they want to deliver as a result of the powers that we can devolve. But you will see a series of further devolution deal announcements. We saw Sheffield on Friday with a deal that also brought in £900 million of additional funding through the gain share model, which will allow Sheffield not only to control more of its own destiny, make more of its own decisions, but also to leverage in some of the money it needs to get the maximum benefit from the opportunities that exist in that city region area. That will not be the last of the devolution announcements going forward. We're in talks with a lot of areas, and there's a lot of really strong and good potential in some of the bids that have come forward. So that's one of the things that is going to happen next in the short term. We're going to see the bill going through Parliament, hopefully successfully. My career may be a short-lived one, if it does not. And we're going to then see areas not just making the deals and those deals being announced, but then being put into effect. The governance structures, the funding streams, the control that they want over the areas of policy that are agreed. Leading, of course, through 2017, when we'll see the elections of the Metro mayors, who will give that democratic accountability and that figurehead, that person to drive forward those plans and to deliver on those deals. And deals are two-way things. It's not about us telling an area what we will have. It's not about an area demanding from us what they want. It's about having a sensible discussion about what we can do to give them the best opportunity to grow their economy, to give them the tools that they need to drive the growth that we know exists, the underlying potential that exists in so many of these areas across the north in particular, to help us build the Northern Powerhouse to deliver on that government agenda. So that's one of the things I think you will see relatively soon coming forward. We have lots of other things, of course, going on as well. Transport for the North will be getting fully, properly established, appointing people to actually take control across the north of England in a strategic and coordinated way of transport decisions that previously have been taken in Whitehall. We will see things like the Enterprise Zone programme, delivering new enterprise zones, targeting it at the areas that have the best potential. We'll see regional development funds being released, being structured in a way that can deliver for areas but ensures that areas get the maximum benefit from them as well. We've got an awful lot to do, and the list is not an exhaustive one because it will be added to as time goes on. Just as when Greater Manchester made its devolution deal, the original package that they got was not the package that we see today because it's gone on to evolve. You will see that with the Northern Powerhouse as a concept. So there are things that we're doing now, there are things that are obviously part of it, but there are things that will be added to it as time progresses. And Manchester got the deal, they then identified further opportunities for things that they wanted. And they also pushed back on things that we had not been able to agree with them in the first instance, so we could find a way to agree with them to put the structures in place. And Manchester is now on its third round of asks from government for what it wants to be devolved to it, and we continue to work with them to ensure that where it makes sense, those are the sort of things we're supporting them to do. It will evolve as a concept devolution will evolve in Manchester much in the same way as the Northern Powerhouse will continue to evolve as a concept of a thread that runs throughout this Parliament and this government. And the single most powerful driver for that is the fact that it's the idea of, it's the project of the Chancellor himself who wants to see it be a success. I do, Paul, want to address one of the points that you made, which I think is a very fair academic point, that not everywhere can be a powerhouse. But I think the challenge that lies within that is there is the political and practical reality that we should ensure always that there is something in this process for everyone who wants to be a part of it. I'm very keen that we take maximum advantage of what can be done in the great cities of the north, of the agglomeration, if we can deliver it successfully, and what that will unlock in terms of economic growth. But I'm also keen to send the message that this isn't something just for the big cities. There's got to be something in this for other areas as well. And I said about, in my earlier comments, that devolution will be bespoke deals. They'll be different in different places, and quite rightly so. So what works for rural North Yorkshire will quite probably be quite different to what might work for Greater Manchester, what might work for Tees Valley, where I'm from, and so on, or for Cumbria. But we want to ensure that there is something there and we address the potential. And we should recognise as well that many of the people who drive the economies in the big cities of the north live in the fringes and in the outskirts. They live in the broader community that exists across this area. So absolutely a focus on a hard-headed economic good sense is needed. Not everywhere can be an agglomerated great city, but there should be something for every part of the north, and indeed every part of the country, in devolution as an agenda. And I want to ensure that benefit is felt and spread. So as I recognise what you say, I think in terms of the language that I would choose to use, I would always want to be careful to make very clear this is not something that's just for cities. The cities will play a key role. The potential there is perhaps its greatest because of the nature of the way that the economy works, the structures that exist, the population centres that are focused in cities by very definition. But there is something there as well for other communities that want to be part of it, and we're encouraging them to come forward. And David, your comments about Cumbria are a perfect case in point. Cumbria is a great place, but not many people would suggest that it's a great city. It's something different. But actually it has huge potential to attract significant investment, to be a world leader across a range of areas of important, high-skilled work. And we need to ensure that we capture and maximise the benefits that will flow from the investment that's going to go into Cumbria over the years to come. So I'm delighted to hear your comments and very much endorse what you said, and want to see Cumbria play its role in what we're doing more broadly to deliver on this agenda. So there are lots of things happening. It's a very broad project. It's a very broad and a very deep project. And the most significant thing that I have found is when I travel to the north of England, people are excited about it. Now, I'm from Teesside. When I go home, businesses want to come and see me to talk about the Northern Powerhouse. They want to be part of what is being done. They want to understand where the opportunities will lie in the future. That is a very important thing in itself. Because my experience as a Teesside MP is that for too many years, too often, we've bemoaned our position. We complained about our lot. Whenever there was bad news on national television, Newsnight would, sorry Mark, BBC, Newsnight would get on the train, come up to the northeast, somebody would stand in front of the Middlesbrough Transporter Bridge and say, hey, it's miserable up here. And you know what, funnily enough, that didn't attract investment. A shift took place in Teesside for various reasons a few years ago, and the tone and the approach changed, broadly speaking. People started talking about why it's a great place to do business, why it's a great place to invest, why it's a wonderful place to live. Actually, the North has a story like that to tell. And one of the things that the Northern Powerhouse as a concept is unlocking is the desire of so many people who are proud of where they live and where they're from and where their businesses are based. It is freeing them to tell that story and make that case. You see that in the trade missions that we're taking abroad, but you see that in the narrative at home as well, and you see it in the attendance at events that are linked to the Northern Powerhouse by serious businesses right across the North of England. This is an exciting project. If we engage with it properly, are positive about it, see it through and deliver it, it will deliver real change that will benefit us all. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak, and look forward to an interesting range of questions.
Thank you, Minister. I think that this Q&A session will work best if we do it in terms of themes. So I'm going to ask 3 questions on the topic of devolved powers, and then move on to transport and governance mayor. So can we please have 3 questions on devolved powers? Anybody interested in devolved powers? The gentleman at the back.
Okay, so when you abolished the North West Regional Development Agency, do you think you need to recast it now so that it can have the devolved powers to coordinate business development and all the areas that you talked about?
Do you want to respond straight
Yeah.
to your question? It's not for me to tell the Northwest what the Northwest needs, and the whole point of the process of devolution is to empower local decision makers. So once we see further devolution in the Northwest, it will be for local decision makers to make the case for what they see as the best structure to deliver for their area. And I can speak from my direct experience in the Northeast, and I've tried to move away from this debate because it's a contentious one in the Northeast of England about the old regional development agency there, One Northeast. A lot of people quite liked it. I didn't. I think it was bad for my part of the Northeast in Teesside. There was a feeling in Teesside that everything was run from Newcastle, whether true or not, and it didn't get its fair share. And when I talked earlier about the shift in tone that I've recognised in my area, in Tees Valley, a big part of that shift was when the single regional development agency went and was replaced with 2 local enterprise partnerships, one of which works for our area. Now that might sound slightly counterintuitive. We're talking about agglomeration, we're talking about cooperation, we're talking about driving economic opportunity by working together and bringing together the opportunities that exist, particularly in our great cities. But I don't think it is. I think what you have to recognise is there are areas where we can work best together, whether that is regionally, whether that is across regional boundaries, whether it is locally. And there are areas where different communities and economies need the flexibility to choose to whom they look. So for Teesside in the Northeast, there are many things that we rightly do in cooperation as a region as a whole to try and drive our economy. But when it comes to something like tourism, Teesside, quite understandably, would rather look to North Yorkshire as its offer and work with them on what it can deliver there, just as on skills development, it might look up to Tyneside to see what needs to be done in that area. So I don't think the recreation of regional development agencies is necessarily the right thing. I certainly don't think it's something that should be driven by me as a minister in Whitehall. But if local areas come together and come up with plans for what they want, we of course should always be open to listening to them.
Paul, do you have any observations to make on this issue?
Well, I think that the problem with 2 types of regional development agencies, and one of them was that they didn't recognise the underlying economic geographies. So I'm sort of agreeing with the Minister that having places that have a common economic sort of centre of gravity and a sphere of influence is a much better way of trying to organise economic development than by imposing some structure on a set of boundaries which are essentially completely irrelevant to economic activity. So, yes, but I think there's a danger of too much localism because there also has to be a logic in the boundaries. That is, they have to really reflect areas in which economic and civic life does interact. And the problem is always that, not just in the north of England, but throughout England, we have got this sort of balkanised mutual hatreds in some places. I once worked at the University of Reading, and the idea that Pangbourne, which was a suburb of Reading, should be part of Reading was absolute horror to the people who lived in Pangbourne, because it was a village, it was a contiguous part of the Reading economy. So we have these absurdities, and we have to try and get over them and cooperate where it's meaningful to cooperate.
Any observations, Dave, based on your experience of living in the state federal government relationship?
Let me just step above, I guess, some of the specifics, but as far as the local effects. But for example, to grow the economy, and again, just looking at Cumbria with the power and so forth, it's not just one region. There's a lot of interdependence that goes on. So the whole interconnection of communities, as well as whether they be development authorities, all have to have some common threads together. I think that's the key, because that brings the focus and sets the priorities of what the investment costs. You just don't put a road to nowhere and then you have to have it interconnected. And that's going to be true, particularly what we see up in the Cumbria area. It's not just roads and highways, it's ports, it's multiple ways to get the goods and supplies and services, and that's how it's going to succeed.
Have we any more questions on devolved powers? This lady here is trying to track my
Sorry,
You go ahead.
I'm a journalist on the Guardian. I just wondered to what extent it's a problem for devolution in the Northern Powerhouse that the Tories, as we've seen here, are still such a toxic brand in most of the urban north. how you get over
You're
that.
from The Guardian, you say?
Yes. I was called Tory Scum yesterday as well.
And it's a very interesting question about how people see. People often look at, you just look at me when I was newly elected, and say, what, you got elected in Stockton? But they hate Tories up there, don't they? And actually, there are a lot of Conservative MPs in the north of England. We want more.
But not in the urban north.
But there are a lot of Conservative MPs nonetheless in the north of England. And the narrative that sometimes people like to portray is a black and white simplistic one. There are people outside, I suspect, who really do quite dislike Conservatives. I would also put forward the argument that people outside are not representative of a very large group in society and of the electorate. But you are absolutely fairly identifying that there is a political challenge that the Conservatives have had over a number of years in the north of England. I think the way that we will address that, I've always made this case, long before I had this particular role in the Northern Powerhouse was on the agenda, is that we stand for what we really believe in. We don't apologise for the things that we know are right and things that we believe will improve people's lives. And we deliver on it in government. When people see what we deliver, they will support us. And I think we saw that at the ballot box at this election, where the Twitter noise, if you read it, you thought everybody hated the Conservative Party. You know, the media narrative was often, oh, it's all dreadful, you're all awful, and people don't like what you've done. When people actually came out to vote, they voted, they thought about it with their head, they looked at what it meant for their economy, what the alternative was for their job, their house, their mortgage, their kids' school, their local hospital, those factors that really drive how people make their decisions on polling day, and they chose to vote Conservative in larger numbers than has been the case for a very long time.
Yeah.
I think if we deliver on this agenda and we demonstrate that we're doing things for the north of England because it's the right thing to do, not for some political construct, then people will recognise that and potentially will go on to reward us for it. But that perhaps doesn't include some of those that are protesting and throwing eggs outside.
Moving on, I'd like to know whether anybody has any questions about directly elected mayors and governments. I mean, show of hands on that whole concept. This gentleman from De Havilland.
Right, I have a quick question. You mentioned that elected Metro mayors will be elected in 2017. Is that a fixed point for all devolution deals, or will that point move as, say, each deal is agreed subsequently?
Sort of the latter. That is the point at which hopefully the first round of Metro mayors will be getting elected. But it's an offer that remains on the table for areas on an ongoing basis. And so if an area has not yet got devolution and comes to the party late, we'll still talk to them and look to see what we can deliver. And so there should be a tranche then, but there may be additional tranches as time goes on.
Any questions on transport and what the government's trying to achieve with transport?
Sorry,
Gentleman over here.
one elected mayors.
Yeah, go on, go on.
Financial Times, not the journalist, slightly different
Marginally.
agenda maybe, but of interest, is there any empirical economic evidence that metro mayors or elected mayors are actually better for a city than the current structures?
It's a difficult question because it is an overly simplistic one. There are lots of examples of much stronger cities, much more balanced economies, in which mayors are a factor and a driving force. And you can draw conclusions from that if you choose to do so. You could conclude that yes, there is evidence of it. But that's not the sole reason for elected mayor. I believe that's the case. I think having one person to drive an agenda, to be accountable for it, is a good thing. But I also think we have to recognise that we are talking about a significant transfer of powers from Westminster, from Whitehall, down to a local area to make decisions about its future. And with that needs to come clear and democratic accountability. That doesn't mean that every mayor will necessarily be a great success. The people in each area will choose the person who they want to be their mayor. I'm confident that some of them will be hugely successful and will deliver real positive change. But the reality of democracy is people will get who they vote for.
I think we should hear from Paul on this subject. We've done some work on it.
Well, I think the point of the work is that it doesn't show the mayors. I mean, it's not mayors that make the difference, it's the boundaries that make the difference. You can have different forms of governance, but having a governance that actually reflects the economic reality of the city region, there is good economic evidence that that does help. It's not a magic cure-all, but it systematically helps the growth and the productivity of that urban economy. And a study of mine that I referred to, but there's also now this big OECD study, which is across many countries, coming to very similar results from a very different methodology.
Dave, can we tempt you to talk about the experience in the US and directly elected mayors?
I'll step aside from the politics of the election versus the appointment, but will speak that it does come down to leadership. And as an example, whether it's geographical boundaries that define a region or whether it's elected processes, whatever, key for success is to have whether elected or appointed officials that know the value of strategic planning, know the value of putting master plans together, zoning, all of those aspects, and the discipline that goes with that is really critical to be able to achieve the objectives. Because people can change over time, and if you have a plan that's been bought into well, that will be successful for the growth and prosperity.
Thank you. Now, I'd like to move on to transport. The Minister tells me that he's got to leave us at 2 o'clock, so if we could have questions on the issue of transport, and then I'll give the Mayor the opportunity for audience then, making some concluding remarks. The gentleman with his hand up over there.
Right, in Ireland, Sunderland, in a town of Weir, bus services have been destroyed in the last 10 years. You don't know what bus you get, you don't know what route it is, all of the routes are treated. If a bus is missing, you wait ages for it. So I've never been in a car owner whatsoever. I've always used public transport overnight. And I'll tell you one thing, even the metro is a wide everything. Because basically to be bus services come through the metro and then it's investigated. Barry up here used to get a bus up to Cramlington just under years ago. Got cancelled, got gone. Used to get a bus to Blind, got gone. People used to go for tourism, to Blind, it's all gone.
So are you looking for more coordinated transport delivery?
I mean, this is strange. There's a bus station in Sunderland outside the civic centre. Certain buses are not going in there to use it because of the cost of the use it. Because the price of what councils cost them to use it. The stagecoach buses.
Right, gentleman in the back.
The east-west links are appallingly bad. North-south isn't very much of an issue, particularly connecting to London is actually relatively straightforward. Manchester to London and the east not as good. But the real issue for connectivity must be east-west. The question can only be addressed in terms of resources. So what is the government proposing to actually put into the resources requirement to resolve both infrastructure for both rails as well as for roads? Because that's a significant issue. If there's no money going in, then the talk about connectivity between cities really is only ever going to be talk.
Yeah. Now, just before you go, I'd like you to sort of make some concluding remarks and also touch on this whole issue of attracting inward investment from overseas.
Yes, happy to do that. Okay, buses, one of the things that some areas are looking at is more control over bus franchising, so it may be something where some change can be delivered. I can't stand here and promise a plentiful and endless supply of new buses. If I did, I would win my constituency hands down every election. This issue does come up time and time again, but I recognise the concern that you raise. On the broader issue of east-west transport links, you're absolutely right. Connectivity east-west is not as good by some stretch as north-south. I know that as a Teesside MP, and as a Teesside MP who now travels across the northwest quite a lot in particular. There are improvements planned, there's significant investment already going in. You will have seen the announcement that the electrification has been unpaused, which is good news for some of that investment going into TransPennine and so on. There's also a lot we can do through the franchising, which is looking to improve the rolling stock, getting rid of the paces, starting to build on those necessary investments to deliver better transport links. But the driving force behind this looking forward will be through transport for the north. And that's the point. Is there are things we're doing, there are things the government is investing in, significant transport investment is going into the north. But we're also now looking at giving the north more coordinated and strategic control over the decisions that will be taken in the future to improve those transport links and working with them to ensure that's a success. So you will see things happening in the shorter term in terms of the investment going in, but more importantly and strategically, Transport for the North will then take on the role of coordinating and controlling that strategic investment, because you're absolutely right to identify, for example, the east-west connections. But there are specific issues that come up from place to place, where local individuals affected by local authorities might understand it, but often in Whitehall that message has been lost and money has ended up going elsewhere. This will give the North a strong voice in transport and a clear and coordinated role in developing strategies for transport for the future. On inward investment, as a sort of final point, I do I'm afraid have to go, my Secretary of State is speaking at 1:30 and I need to be in the hall. This is a huge opportunity because there are people out there right across the world looking to invest. Looking to invest in the UK perhaps, but they don't really mind. They invest in Germany, they invest in France, they invest wherever they get the right return, wherever they see the opportunity that exists. We have a great opportunity and series of opportunities in the north of England. There are great things that people can invest in across the Northern Powerhouse. And the concept, now it's been put forward, has captured the attention of many of those investors. We have a steady stream of people now wanting to come and see me from countries around the world to say, how do we invest in the Northern Powerhouse? How do we play a role in this? How can we visit? How can we see the opportunities? What can we do? Because for too long, investing in the UK has meant investing in London. And that's great. We want investment in London. But actually, we've got other things that we can sell as well. We've got other offers on the table. And one of the things that Northern Powerhouse has done, one of the reasons that UKTI is now actively involved in this project, one of the reasons you've seen Northern Powerhouse themed trade missions is because of the recognition that actually, as a brand, this is a brand that sells, and it's a brand that's understood. And when you get to places like China, they are facing many of the same political challenges that we are. They want their cities to join together. They want to grow the economies of their cities. They want to look at what we're doing with devolution, what we're doing with the Northern Powerhouse, and learn from it to see what they can do at home as well. And some of these Chinese cities are absolutely huge. Some of these Chinese cities individually are larger in population terms than the big great cities of the north of England. And if we can get some of that investment here, if we can use it as a mechanism to open the door to put forward our pitch for why the north of England is a good place to invest, just as London is and has always been in the past, I think we will see more investment coming in. We'll see significant benefits from that investment when it arrives. Thank you so much for the invitation. Yes, thank you very much. Sorry.
We have the room booked for at least another half an hour, as I understand it. So do feel free to get some